So let's go ahead and begin. And once again, thank you so much. What a great turnout of folks. And I just saw a chat come across. Good afternoon from Germany. Good afternoon, Germany. Thank you for being here. And I see Roland is here from the UK. So thank you and good afternoon, Roland. So today we have a program, and this will be informal. We're gonna chat, and there'll be time for you to ask questions or make comments towards the end too. So feel free to participate in that way. Um, this fall we've been exploring dual belonging. Um, as all of us I think probably know, Zen Peacemakers being a part of our founding and part of our foundation is interfaith. Despite the fact that the title of our organization implies that we are strictly a Zen organization, we're strictly not. In fact, we're not even strictly Buddhist. We have lots of Christians, we have lots of Jewish people, we have Muslims who are part of our organization, and people who are unaffiliated, but who do have a contemplative practice. The core of our work really is social action rooted in contemplative practice, and that crosses all kinds of invisible lines, I think. Um, so this fall we've had a nice program set of programs with friends of ours who are involved in what we're calling dual belonging. Father Greg Boyle from Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles was a guest, and he's very much a Jesuit priest, but he also admits to considering himself a Buddhist. Father Michael Holleran from New York City is a Jesuit priest also, but he is a transmitted teacher in the White Plum Zen lineage. He's a sensei in White Plum. And then more recently, James Ishmael Ford was our guest, and he's a Roshi in the Zen lineage and a Unitarian minister. So it's been a lot of fun and very enlightening for us to explore this. So um, I'll make this brief. You didn't come to listen to me talk, so I'm going to hand this over as quickly as I can, but not without introductions. So um, I have the great pleasure of being able to work with Chloe setting up these programs, and I thought I'm just going to invite my friends to this program. So I did. So let me make just brief introductions, but then I'm gonna call on them to say more about themselves. Uh, Amy Jonin Newell-Large is a recently ordained Episcopal minister, priest. I think I say priest. In Denver. She and I are both part of the same Zen Sangha, also here in the Boulder area. And she took the precepts a few years ago, and we practice together multiple times a week. Um, Willie Mukei Smith is an Episcopal priest and a Zen priest, affiliated with the village Zendo in Greenwich Village. I think you've moved out of Greenwich Village, haven't you, to Soho? What is it? It's the thread factory. I think you told me it's a neat building.
It's the Tribeca.
It's in Tribeca, yeah. And Muke and I met each other literally within a few days of me starting as executive director, a little over 2.5 years ago in New York City. We shared dinner with I don't know, about 10 people, 8 or 10 people, uh, Italian place. And sat next to each other and got to know one another, and have been friends ever since. And then last but not least, Father Paul Rietmann. Other than my family, Paul is my oldest. I don't want to say oldest. That's not right. My longest
Yeah.
friend in the world. We've known each other since the '60s, middle '60s, and I owe a great deal of who I am to Paul. He and I grew up, or we may still be waiting to grow up.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about that, but we were young together. And when I was thinking about this morning, I was reminded that and I don't know if it was your book or my book, but when we were in middle school, in junior high school, one of us had Houston Smith's The World of Religions. I
Mhm.
think you did. I think it was at your house, but we I think we both read that book cover to cover, and it had a huge influence on me, to be sure. So uh, welcome, Jonin, Mukei, and Paul. Thank you so much for being here. So along the lines of this topic of dual belonging, really afoot in the Christian world, afoot in the Zen world, or perhaps maybe we might say part of your heart in each of those worlds. Let's go around and each of you, if you want to just go ahead and improvise a little bit and let us know, how did that happen? What's that like for you? How does how do you balance, if you do balance? And Jonan, let's go ahead and start with you, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. It's like most recent ordinand has to go first. Thank you. I really appreciate, as you were talking, Shoen, about, the impact of your childhood on how you experience your practice and your life of faith today. And for me, that is absolutely true, that my faith is very much founded in how I grew up. I'm a cradle Episcopalian. I've always been in the Episcopal Church. And the way I practiced my faith was very much influenced by my parents. My mom in particular taught me to pray in a way that I use the term, it's a very contemplative prayer. I don't know if she would use that term, it's a contemplative prayer, but it's an awareness of God's presence with me, no matter what, no matter where, and being able to tune into that, and based on my breathing and visualization. And so that really set how I practice my faith up to be very in tune with more mindfulness and meditation. And throughout my childhood, I had interest in other religions. I also, as an adolescent, had a copy of Houston Smith's World Religions. I took yoga classes from a woman who was a practicing Hindu, and then started to learn mindfulness as an adolescent as well. And my first formal introduction to Zen in particular came when I moved to Colorado. I went from Gonzaga University, which is a Jesuit institution, that I really loved and appreciated a lot of the spiritual curiosity that Gonzaga really fostered. And I wanted to study interreligious dialogue. So I came to Naropa University in Boulder, a Buddhist institution, in order to start that journey in a very formal way. And I started sitting Zen with Shishin Roshi, who is the founder of Great Mountain Zen Monastery here in Colorado. And the best way that I can describe my initial experience of sitting Zen is that it was like coming home in a way that I had only ever experienced taking communion in the Episcopal Church. And I appreciate that my colleagues are nodding. I've always gone to an Episcopal church. And so I had an Episcopal church even in Boulder that I was attending. And there is something that is so heartful about that experience of, like I say, kind of coming home and knowing that this place, how I am moving in it and the way that I am experiencing it has the depth of holding that I had only ever found, again, previously in that church communion experience. And it was so beautiful for me to experience that. And it was such a moment of vastness and yet also complete intimacy. And the way that the language that I often use to describe that sense of coming home is also a sense of knowing that the Spirit was moving me in this place and in this way, and that I could rest here. And that really set me down a path of continuing to practice Zen, knowing that this was a place that I was at home. And I continued to sit at Naropa, and then occasionally with Great Mountain Zen. And then my husband and I moved away from Colorado. And when we moved back, I started sitting with what is now Eon Zen, and have continued that regular practice. So it was almost 15 years ago that I first started sitting Zen with Shishin Roshi at Naropa. And then it's been about 9 years that I've been sitting with Eon Zen, and have continued to choose to make that commitment in my life, several every day. But taking the precepts and going on that journey of discernment was really lovely. And I went through the year, as just a fun little note, the year that I was going through discernment for the priesthood was also the year that I was preparing to take the Bodhisattva vows and go through Jukai. And so that year of discernment in general, of how my spiritual life was, how I was as a spiritual person in the world, and what that was going to look like in my vocation, just really blossomed in a beautiful way.
Thanks,
I feel like
Jonin.
that's a good place to stop.
That was perfect, wonderful. And during that year, you learned the fineries of navigating a needle and thread.
Yes, learned, but maybe not, definitely not mastered.
Thank you so much. Um, Willie Mukei, if you'd like to share with us, please.
Sure. A number of similarities. I would say I was influenced by my godmother was a very strong influence in terms of spirituality for me, and she was a woman who saw God in everything. There was God was in every. I remember once I had a favorite teddy bear, and I asked her, I said, "Does God love my teddy bear?" And she says, "Of course he does. You know, what makes you think he doesn't?" And I just remembered, you know, I probably was maybe 5 years old or something like that, but just having that sense. But there was always an awareness that there was something, was in part of something bigger. And so I fast forward, when I was in college, I was interested in Buddhism, and I was recently doing a purge, going through books that I no longer wanted. And I came across a number of books, Herman Hesse being one of them, and then Thomas Merton being another, which I just devoured the books. And it was just sensed this strong attraction to what is this deeper sense of being. And I hadn't considered Episcopal priesthood then, and maybe it was part of the discernment process of going to this pull. But I always had this interest of spirituality and going to something deeper, and I was very fortunate in my college and graduate educations, looking at the mystics, Julian of Norwich, who was very, very much a fundamental person in my life, and all the other English mystics. And I always felt that there was a closeness here, that it wasn't a separate thing. And I learned very early in my life, especially when everyone around me would say, well, God is in that building. And I would say, well, no, God isn't in that building. God is around. God is around. And I that strong sense of pull, and even as through seminary, I had one of my professors, two of my professors, who were active Buddhists and who introduced Buddhist thinking and literature into my classes, and I felt like, okay, we're on to something there here, and now how do I begin to deepen this? And my CPE training was very, very helpful for me, because after ordination, I had an opportunity to study another round of Buddhism through chaplaincy, through a Buddhist lens. And I took 5 years of that kind of work, because I could just begin to see an integration of how things work. And that's when I began to learn how to sit, was during chaplaincy. And when you are with someone, whoever they are, be it a nurse, be it a patient, be it someone, you sit with it, you sit with them. And I was then introduced to my root teacher, Roshi Enki O'Hara. And I remember one of our colleagues had died, and her memorial was on a Sunday. And I went after services, and I went with my collar on. And her name was Peggy, and I got extremely self-conscious. And I said, well, I'm going to take my collar off, because some of the people were in robes, and I didn't want to, upset the apple cart. And so I was told, no, Peggy would have wanted you to have your collar on, so you wear your collar. So I remember as we were going up to offer incense, that I had my collar on, and like you, Amy, I felt like, this is home. This is home. And I remember right after there was a repast after the memorial, and I spoke to Enki Oroshi, and I said, I want to talk to you about some things. And so we made an appointment, and talked about Zen, and because I had no idea what I was getting myself into. All I knew, I just felt something, the sense of being at home and groundedness, and wanting to deepen it even more. And so I remember it was in May of, and this is the part that always confuses me, because I feel like it's been a long time I've been doing Zen, but I haven't been doing Zen for a long time. Well, I'll say 2007, but I sat Tangario, which is a whole day of sitting, and 4 years later. So there was a process of sitting. And then in 2007 is when I sang Tangario, because in 2011 I took the precepts. That's when I learned to seal the Rakusu, and even that was an interesting practice. Sewing up to the last minute and just before the ceremony, and years later, I remember I spoke with Enki Oroshi about becoming a Zen priest. And it took a number of years before that happened. Again, I had to sew a robe, much larger robe. And it took me 4 years and 4 months to finally sew the okesa. And that was a very moving experience there was a very moving experience, because to take a piece of cloth and cut it up and then to sew it in a certain way. And I've told folks, I felt like I was managing a living being, because as I was sewing, felt like if I did something wrong, or if I wasn't paying attention, I would stick myself, and it felt like a little nip, like somebody would say, wake up, pay attention, you're doing this wrong. And it was during the time of COVID that I was sewing, and it was during the time of the Trump years that I was sewing. And what emerged it's a 7-panel robe. I said, what emerged what looked like a human being, because I remember I had to pick it up with both arms, and I looked like I was carrying a body. And I've worn it not a lot of times, but it feels to me like I'm putting on skin. And so there's been this shift. And how do you articulate that? I don't have words for it. It's just like when you're in the presence. It's, at that time serving at an altar in an Episcopal church, you're in the midst of something. It's energy That's how it feels. And, that's it. I'll stop there.
Lovely, lovely, Willie. Thank you so much for sharing that. Brother Paul.
Yes, Geoff, thank you. And so good to be with everyone this morning. I've really looked forward to this since we started planning it, I think back in August. We finally got a date on the calendar. And Amy and Willie, thanks for your stories. I certainly resonate a great deal with what both of you are saying. Yeah, and a little bit about Geoff and I. We grew up in the same town together, had pretty much the same upbringing. I think we got to know each other in 6th grade and 7th grade, right in there. And Geoff is my longest friend that I'm still friends with, that I communicate with and have kept up with for all of these years, I guess over 60 years, something like that. So Geoff is just a real blessing to be here with you and with all your community. And I was so thrilled when almost 3 years ago, Geoff, you got the job working for Zen Peacemakers. I was just so happy, and I know you've done a fantastic job, and it's just a real blessing. And yeah, a little bit about my journey. I grew up in the Episcopal Church, did all the things you do growing up in a church, went to Sunday school, served as an acolyte or altar person in the church, and just really was baptized and confirmed, and just really fell in love with just the life of the church, but particularly worship. Back in the old days in the church, I don't know how much it happens these days in the Episcopal Church, but back when I was growing up, you'd walk in the church and it was completely silent. No talking. You couldn't talk before service. And I just loved coming into the church on Sunday morning and kneeling down and just saying my prayers and being with God in what was described as the beauty of holiness. So that was a big formation for me. And like Willie and Amy were both saying, my mother was a big influence on me, my spiritual life. She was a very prayerful person, very dedicated, in love with Jesus. And she gave me a copy of Good News for Modern Man, I think when I was in 8th grade, which was a modern English translation of the New Testament, and got me to start reading the Gospels and got to know Jesus in a personal way. So that was really a big part of my formation. But one thing about being Episcopalian, and maybe just naturally, Amy, I love your word curiosity, curious. I've always been curious about other denominations within the Christian church. And then when Geoff and I went to college in other religions, and Geoff, I know you grew up in the Roman Catholic Church, and I grew up in the Episcopal Church back in the late 50s and 60s. And we knew we both went to different churches, and we really couldn't go to each other's churches together. You remember that, Geoff? It was really a strange thing. It just never happened. It couldn't happen. But once Geoff and I went to college, we started studying Eastern religions. I think we both got a copy of Be Here Now by Ram Dass, and that got the whole bowl rolling towards meditation and learning about Eastern religions. And then Geoff moved to Santa Barbara, California, and I followed him down there, and we went even deeper into it. Geoff started studying Zen, and we read Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, and 3 Pillars of Zen, and kind of went pretty deep into that direction. But I decided to get more engaged in the church when we were in college down there. And 1977, I went to seminary. And Geoff, I believe that's about the same time you went to the LA Zen Center. So we went in different directions in terms of our religious traditions, but we were both stayed in touch. And so always been very interested in different religions, and always had an affinity to Buddhism. As time went on, I think Thich Nhat Hanh, my primary Buddhist teacher, when Thich Nhat Hanh passed away earlier this year, I realized that he was probably the most influential spiritual teacher in my life over the last 30 years. And here he is, a Buddhist, a Vietnamese Zen teacher. And his book, Living Buddha, Living Christ, has been a real guiding book for me since it came out some 30 years ago. But another aside for me in terms of my interfaith or dual belonging journey is that in 2003, I married a Jewish woman who was very involved in the Reformed synagogue temple in Tacoma. And I was rector or pastor of St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Tacoma. And it was kind of interesting. Both congregations accepted both of us very beautifully. And so Sally would come to church and sit in the back pew with all the kids and the parents fighting the little kids during the church service. And she just loved sitting in the back. And then I would go to the synagogue with her on Friday nights for Shabbat services. And so we celebrated all the Christian holidays, all the Jewish holidays, Passover, Rosh Hashanah, all those, and just had a really deep dual belonging experience because we were both literally members of each other's congregations. And just the sense of welcoming was just really fantastic. And I always kidded Sally, I would say, I think I learned more about Jesus from you being Jewish than any professor that I had in seminary, because she lived the Jewish faith and really picked up a great deal from it. But fast forwarding a bit longer, I retired as an Episcopal priest, at least from parish ministry, 6 years ago. And I kind of goofed off for the first year of my retirement. My wife, Judy, and I did quite a bit of, Sally passed away after 10 years of cancer. So that was a deep loss for me. And I remarried a beautiful woman named Judy that I'm in Hawaii with right now for 10 days. But when I retired from parish ministry, I thought, well, what do I want to do when I grow up? Still trying to grow up, Geoff, and always really what I wanted to do was devote myself to meditation and contemplative prayer. So I started attending a Vipassana Buddhist group in Tacoma. I got to know the teacher there very well and started practicing mindfulness meditation, and then kind of went on from there to the local Tacoma Zen Center, which is a Soto Zen group, and have sat with them. And kind of what's happened with me, my primary practice is centering prayer in Christian contemplative tradition, kind of all of the teachings of Thomas Keating. But what's impressed me about Buddhism, particularly Zen Buddhism, is just their emphasis, once again, upon silence. That's something that we don't do very well in church services. There's a rubric in the Episcopal liturgy that says silence shall be kept or may be kept, and maybe it lasts 10 or 15 seconds, and then we go on to the next thing. Whereas when you walk in to meditate with a Zen group, silence is so huge. So that's really been a big draw for me. The other thing is just the emphasis on practice, that meditation or prayer is a practice. It's something you do every day. You keep going back to it. And Christianity has had problems, and it's been historically such a belief-centered religion. It's what you believe is most important. So what's really drawn me to Buddhism in these traditions is that it's a practice-based religion. It's something that you practice daily and live out in your daily life. And so these last 6 years in retirement, I finally had the time to devote myself to meditation and contemplative prayer. I'm currently involved in an interfaith meditation group that meets weekly. And we have about 15 or 20 people who get together on Zoom. And my main ministry now in retirement is I'm a spiritual director. I do spiritual guidance with people. And most of the people I work with are aging baby boomers, such as myself, who kind of want to get back into their faith, deepen their faith, and learn about meditation and prayer. So that's kind of where I'm at today.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you very much. And speak for yourself. I'm not aging.
Okay. Got it.
I like that you mentioned the belief aspect of it. After I gave a talk, I don't remember what it was, a year ago or so. Someone came up to me that I was there for the first time and said, "You've been doing this practice for a long time. How has it affected your philosophy of life?" And I said, "Well, I no longer have one."
Good point.
I want to ask a question about, and we can kind of do it popcorn style, whoever would like to speak, but about similarities and differences, between the two worlds that you have a foot in each of, and if there are, you know, any conflicts that ever come up around that. I'll share something. James Ishmael Ford was a guest a few weeks ago, and one of the attendees at his session, like this, very much like this, was sharing that he had been raised Christian but began practicing Zen, and that the Zen teacher that he was working with told him that he was going to have to drop all of that Christian stuff.
Mm.
And so we had a little discussion about that. And the comment that I made was the Zen teacher was half right. You have to drop all the Zen stuff too. So I'm wondering, maybe I'll rephrase. Are there times where you ever look at yourself or ask yourself or experience, there's a real difference here, or there's a huge similarity here, or there's any tension between the two practices? I'm not sure if that's a well articulated question or not. Does that resonate with anybody? Any thought about that?
For me, the places of kind of conflict are not within myself or my practice or my faith, but it has been actually right with other people who see what I'm doing as different or difficult for them. And I think a lot of that does come from our cultural, social, inherited perspective of right and wrong. And that, what we do does not have a specific right. This is it, as though what I'm doing is somehow better or, more fully anything than what somebody else is doing. So for me, I think that that's more the place that I see and feel tension is in how others from more rigid backgrounds understand this space. For example, I spoke with a woman recently who is an Episcopalian, knows that I have a meditation practice. She herself has only just started reading Tara Brach, who's a mindfulness instructor who comes from a Buddhist background, but has a very dynamic spirituality. And the woman I was speaking with was very concerned about how reading Tara Brach and following Tara's meditations would impact her faith. And she had a space of fear because she grew up thinking that whatever that was not going to be good for her relationship with Jesus. And so being able to be with her as she was, really going through this space of spiritual growth was really wonderful for me, but it definitely showed me again where that tension exists in our culture. So that doesn't quite answer the question as like, from a philosophical perspective, are there things that are ever in tension? And I would say that it's an ongoing journey for me as I engage more with my Buddhist practice, with more chants, with participating in different services. I engage with that more. And if there is something that comes up, then I notice it and pay attention to it. And it's not as though I always have to like resolve things that do arise, because my practice gives me space to be able to sit with that and not, again, solve it or have a right answer for what's happening. I have instead found that my Zen practice and my Episcopal practice really support one another and open my heart together in a way that one on its own doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I was reticent about talking about, no one's ever said, so you're an Episcopal priest, blah, 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 what's that like? And I've never really kind of thrown that out there a whole lot, especially in the Sangha. I mean, people know about it, and I remember saying something to someone about it earlier on in the practice, and but I always felt that folks would say, oh, I can't stand what was it they would say, congregational gatherings. And I felt, oh, well, that's one conversation we're not going to talk about, right? So I felt, well, okay, we'll just kind of put that to the side. And but I would feel like for me that as I see Zen as a way of life, as I also see Christianity as a way of life too. I mean, and I'm not talking about belief, I'm talking about practice. And I would say everything in the Christian scriptures support what we read, or what I've learned in Zen, in reading the Zen teachings. There's no separation. We're all in this together. And everything that Jesus taught was, he didn't say, love your enemies. He didn't say that at all. Somebody else did, but he didn't. And it was, well, how do you immerse yourself with what's around you? And that's what I feel the Zen practice calls us to do, is to, how do you immerse yourself into what's around you? And it's the three tenets, right? You don't know, you bear witness, and out of that I heal others, right? That's it for me. And that's an ongoing practice. That's not just something that where it begins in one place and ends in another, and vice versa. It's not, it's ongoing. And so it is having to deal with the mindset, the culture, where that even in the Zen world too, there's this, and I've gotten in trouble for it, for saying, well, if I eat the right foods, if I wear the right robes, or if I go on X number of retreats, then that's what makes me a Buddhist. And I'm like, okay, that's nice. And how does that help world hunger? Or how does that help the person that you're looking at you can't stand? You know what I mean? I mean, it's in the Zen world too. No one, it's not about being, like Mr. Spock. You know what I mean? You're very appropriate and logical. It's about being right where you are in the moment, and that is a practice.
Thanks, Willie. I don't want to put you on the spot, Paul, and if you've anything to add, please go ahead.
Yeah, sure do. I feel like it's a tension between Buddhist teaching and Christian teaching, but it's not a conflict. And I find both enriching to each other. One thing that I really admire about Buddhist teachers that I've been around is they're so kind of open about the teaching. It's sort of like a take it or leave it attitude. If this is helpful, incorporate it into your life. If not, don't worry about it. Just keep moving on, which is kind of quite different than Christianity, when we're trying to convince people so many times about the truth of the gospel or salvation or whatever it means. So to me, the Buddhist openness and open-mindedness is just so receptive and just makes me feel at home. It's interesting, as a spiritual director, kind of just in the last year, I've started working with two young women who have been practicing Buddhism, one in the Zen tradition and one with the Thai forest tradition. And they've both been they're both around 40, but they've been practicing for around 15 years, but they feel this calling to come back to their Christianity, to come back to Christ at age 40 or 44, which has been a real interesting journey. And the one woman was confirmed in the Episcopal Church last summer, and just felt that she came back. But one of her concerns was that she'd have to give up her Buddhist belief in order to become a Christian again. And so part of my work with her would be to reassure her that that wasn't necessary. You could have dual belonging, and just that phrase, dual belonging, really helped. And the second woman, who's just now starting to come back and explore her Lutheran roots, was really concerned about it. Oh, do I have to give up my Buddhist community, my Buddhist practice? And so this idea of dual belonging really resonates with her too. And it's interesting, she's been going to church lately and just crying, coming back home to church, feeling God's love and the love of the community, but yet she's still part of her Buddhist Sangha too. So it's been really a good thing. So I see them far more complementary than I do. Amy, I would say to you, I admire your path, working in a congregation with your Buddhist Christian identity. That takes a lot of courage, and that's a much more challenging environment that I'm in, because people that I tend to be with want to associate with an interfaith type of perspective. So, yeah.
Thanks, Paul. And Michael, I see your hand up. We'll do questions here in a little bit after we finish this part. So stick with us, Michael. I'm interested to ask you all about Merton. I was doing an exercise in a group earlier this year, and found myself making notes about growing up Roman Catholic and how that had an influence on me today. And I wrote down, well, it was cold in the church, it was dark, my butt hurt because it was a wooden pew, there was a guy in a robe, there was incense, and we were chanting in a different language. I thought, go figure. I mean, what are the odds, right? From reading in high school, Paul, like you and I did, Alan Watts and D.T. Suzuki and others before Be Here Now came, and then stumbling onto Merton. My parents had Merton books in the house, but the Asian Journal of Thomas Merton just spun me around, and all of the rigidity around, well, that's not this, and this isn't that, and these are different, and this is better, and all that just fell down. And because Thomas Merton just stepped over all of those invisible lines. There weren't any lines. Did anyone else have a Merton experience at some point in your time?
Well, I'll start off on that one, because kind of my whole interest in contemplation, contemplative prayer comes from Merton. Back when we were in college, Geoff, reading his New Seeds of Contemplation just blew my mind, especially those first couple of chapters where he talks what is contemplation and what contemplation is not. And, it just blew my mind, and I want to become a contemplative. I'm still working on that 50 years later, trying to become one. But then after that, I read the Asian Journal and his journey into Asia, Sri Lanka, into Buddhism and Hindu meditation. He just had a way to, I like your word, step over. And that one experience that he had next to those reclining Buddhas, I think in Sri Lanka, was a profound mystical enlightenment experience, and he just felt at one with God and everything else at that. So that just captured my imagination. And I'm not a big reader of Merton, but he would be one of probably my top 5 inspirations in my whole spiritual journey.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, as I mentioned before, Merton was a very formative person for me, and I read the Asian Journal myself, but I read Seven Story Mountain at least 3 times, because I was just taken with his, what led him to go into a monastery to seek that contemplation. And then whenever when I finished CPE as a seminarian, I remember, I think it was Waters of Silo. He talked about the monastic tradition, and I felt a strong pull towards that, that silence and posture. But and what I still is still a important piece for me is this prayer that he wrote. My God, I know that you exist, but I know whatever I do pleases you. And he just offers this prayer. It says that I know you're the one in control, but I know that you're not the one who's saying this is bad or this is wrong. Whatever I do and wherever I'm being led is all by you. And I said, okay, I can live that. I can live that.
Thank you.
I'll just say I have a wonderful appreciation for Merton, and he was certainly an influence for me. I had a professor at Gonzaga who was he had a Catholic practice and a Zen Buddhist practice, and so he was one of the first people who really showed me that can be. And so I never even second guessed that what I was doing was just fine and wonderful to do, because that's what, Merton had done. That's what my professor had done. And I never felt, a sense of needing, again, to reconcile my meditation and Zen practice with my Episcopal faith. And so I think that Merton certainly did start to pave that way. But my own real appreciation, I don't remember which book he writes it in, but it's when he's in Louisville and he has that experience at like 14th, and I forget what the intersection is. It's a busy intersection. Do you know what it is, Paul?
Yeah, 4th and Walnut. Yeah.
4th and Walnut. That's
Yeah.
right. And he talks about, the penetrating light of everyone walking by him, and this experience of absolutely knowing that light shining, within everyone. And it's so bright. And that resonated with me because, again, the prayer practice that my mom taught me was a visualization and of tuning into God's light with me. And so I was very used to that, but also growing up, she taught me to put other people in that bright light and to see God's light in their heart as well. And so that practice for me, even if I'm that's a very regular practice that I have. I'll be driving or, sitting in traffic and seeing the light that is in the cars, coming around me, or seeing that light that is in others sitting in, the chair next to me, wherever I am. And so that practice that he had, that experience that he had really resonated. I was like, I see that, I know that. And that was just a really lovely space to begin. And I will say for myself, while Merton is very explicit about the Zen and Catholic kind of relationship, there are quite a few, as Willie mentioned earlier, mystic Christian teachers, and even modern mystic Christian teachers. John Philip Newell has been a significant influence on my contemplative path. Cynthia Bourgeot, Thomas Keating. There's a number of folks for whom the experience, and again, that practice, is really what brings their faith into life, and in a way that really does resonate with Zen Buddhism as well.
Thank you. Wonderful comments. We have such a nice group here, and I know there are going to be questions and comments. So uh, I'd like to open up for questions. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, down under reactions, I can't see everybody. We're on a couple of pages here. So you can raise your electronic hand. But I'm going to do something that I hope doesn't get me into trouble here first. I'm going to call on someone, and Grant, if you'd prefer me to wave off, let me know. My friend, and Willie's friend, Grant Fuku Sensei, is here, and every winter, I think you're still here, Grant. Every winter, Grant spends some time up in Snowmass, and Grant, if you are comfortable doing so, and you have anything to share about that, I think it would be interesting to everybody.
I'll keep it brief because I think I should, but also because I'm in the doctor's office waiting to go in a couple of minutes for an appointment. Thus
Uh,
the mask. Can you understand what I'm saying?
Very well. Yeah. Thanks, Grant.
Um, I love Thomas Merton. I'm getting teary-eyed thinking about it. I've been blessed to be going up to the centering prayer at Snowmass since 2008. And I calculated the number of times, number of days I've spent up there, and I've actually been a resident now for more than half a year. It's marvelous, and I found Thomas Merton up there in the library, but my introduction to centering prayer was through Thomas Keating, and yeah, I don't feel a duality. The welcoming that I have up there as usually the only Buddhist in a sitting group of 20 or 22 for 10 days is home. Home is what I think Amy mentioned it first, and I really agree with it. It just feels like home. And it's silence. I mean, contemplative prayer and the deep practice is silence. And yeah, I think all I can really say is I love that practice, and I love my Zen practice too. So I'm really glad I could be here, and glad. Sorry, I have to peel off in a couple of minutes, but thank you, Geoff, and yeah, it was great. Paul and Amy and Mukei, beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant, and good luck in the doctor's office. Is it Michael or Mikkel? Thanks for being patient with me. Go ahead
It's
and.
Michael, but you can use my name, Ruvo. Yeah, I was struck by when we were talking about all the things that we have to give up. I was with Gimpo Merso in a retreat a number of years ago and everything, and he brought this up, and he's saying that oftentimes those of us who come from Christian traditions, what we do is when we study Buddhism is we put everything ended up in the attic, and then we go study whatever it is, the type of Buddhism we're going to study, or whatever other religious tradition. And what he brought up, which I thought was very interesting, was you can't do that. At some point in Zen, you have to go up the stairs to the attic, open the footlocker, and take out all the stuff that you grew up with and everything, and find out how it's affected you, what's still useful, and everything else. So it's a matter of incorporating what you've already learned, not and then giving up the negative things, judgmentalism, all that kind of stuff. But I mean, it's incorporating into yourself and your new tradition what's still useful. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Michael. Much appreciated. And particularly if we have questions or comments for any of our guests, that'll be nice too. But Sengetsu, if you'd like to go ahead and unmute yourself.
My first two serious Zen teachers were retired Catholic nuns, one of whom was a Roshi. And talking to them and also to Bob Kennedy, Father Bob Kennedy, um, they they had to kind of fly under the radar in the institutional church, so that there were things that they really didn't offer or couldn't offer because they'd get into hot water with the bishops. And I remember Kennedy once telling me that there were two bishops who didn't want him anywhere in their diocese teaching meditation. He didn't want them. He didn't want them to be teaching, quote, any of that Oriental prayer stuff, end quote. And I was wondering, and to any of you, did you run into any kind of resistance or flack from the institutional Episcopal Church?
Thanks for the question. Paul, Willie, Amy, anybody want to respond?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. What was your name again? The question.
Oh, just call me Ed.
Ed. Okay, Ed. Paul here. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. When I was first ordained, I went to a parish on the east side of Dallas, Texas, and I was still quite interested in interfaith relations and Buddhism, and I was talking to my bishop, and I said, yeah, I'm really interested in living on the east side of Dallas to get to know some of the Asian Buddhist community there. And he goes, oh, you mean you want to evangelize them, convert them to Christ? And I was just like 3 days, or maybe it was like a week before I was supposed to be ordained. So I totally shut that down, because I could tell he wasn't going to approve any kind of interfaith conversation or anything. So that really shut me down for about 10 or 15 years as far as publicly and part of my ministry talking about interfaith relations. But once I moved back up to the Seattle area, kind of opened it up once again. But yeah, I was really squelched by my bishop right from the get-go.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, I'll jump in because I've recently ordained and do work in a congregation right now. And so certainly thinking about that has been really important. I will say that the bishop who made me a postulant, which set me on the track towards the priesthood, also has a very rich contemplative practice. And so he really understood where I was coming from. And I am profoundly grateful for what he saw in me and encouraging me to continue this path. So his willingness to support me in this is extremely profound. But I also know that geographically, it does make a lot of difference. Being in Colorado, being in Washington is probably very different, as Paul said, than being in Texas. And also I am, there's a question in the chat that relates to this as well. I will say I don't hide that I have a Buddhist practice, and it certainly does come out. And at this point, folks in the congregation will just sort of laugh and, tell me parts of my sermon were very Buddhist. And I'll say, yes, actually, that's true. Because at any point I'm fully Buddhist and I'm fully Christian. I do start each of my sermons with 2 minutes of meditation, not totally silent, but it's a guided, we take a deep breath, we tune into, sacred divine with us. And people really appreciate that. Last night at our midweek service, I did have us just sit for 2 minutes in silence. So I bring that in a way that the other priests that I work with do not, and it has really been appreciated. So at least in my context, in where I am, again, this emphasis on contemplative, without me telling people we're going to do Buddhist meditation now. There is a way that it just comes through because it's how I understand my Christian life as well.
Thanks, Amy.
Hey, Sengetsu, it's nice to see you.
Good to see you, Mukei.
I would agree with Amy. One of my bishops who disclosed to the clericus, he says, well, there's this Zen priest that I'm very friendly with, and he's going to come and talk with us. There was more reaction within the clergy body than it was with him, because folks were like, well, you're bringing this Buddhist in to tell us how to reach people, and of course, that was never said to his face. It was always behind his back. But it opened the door for me to disclose that I was had a Zen practice. And like Amy, I was very intentional at certain times to bring in silence into the service. Those of you who are Christian know that during Holy Week, we do a lot of prostrations. Thought this was a great time, go down on your knees and be quiet for 5 minutes, and people kind of like, whoa, what's going on here? But that's a way I felt to incorporate it, and whenever gifts were brought up, I went into Gasho and just bowed towards them. There were just very simple gestures to incorporate, nothing outlandish.
Thanks, Willie. Nice.
Thank
Very
you.
nice. Very nice. It just a quick comment. It makes me think that we get into less trouble when we're not talking. When it's somatic. I really, again, having gone to Catholic Mass from, I don't know, I was born in '53, and I'm sure I was going before I knew I was going, but for 15 years or something, I don't know, 6 days a week. And I didn't really get it until I came back years later and really appreciated that this is just a group of people moving together and speaking and singing together. And there doesn't have to be any meaning to it whatsoever. It's just us being alive in this place and sharing the space. I had a real profound appreciation for Mass after that. Ann Smith, you've patiently had your hand up for a while. If you'd like to unmute.
Thank you. I'm a fairly new member of ZPI, and part of the draw was interfaith presentation. So thank you so much. I'm an Episcopal deacon in Illinois, and a couple things just were so sweet, and I'm so appreciative. And one is that sense of feeling home, knowing when I'm home. And that was 17 years ago in the Zen Center in Oak Park, Illinois. And the other part that is really helpful for me is that sense of tension, not conflict, but part of the tension of how much and how to reveal the part of myself that's other to my community. How much of my Zen practice to reveal to my Episcopal congregation, and how much to reveal to my Zen Sangha. And I'm in a period of feeling like I'm almost like coming out, in a sense of, how one would if of how they're different. And any other comments or thoughts about that would be real helpful. One of the things I've done is that in my Christian congregation, I pulled back just a little bit from some of the activities that are not required of me. And I said that I'm busy with my Ango. And I explained what Ango was. And most of the people went like, well, okay. And I'm fairly new in this congregation. I've been there maybe about 7 months. So they quite haven't figured me out yet. And then on the other side, there's things that happen on Sundays. And I've finally said to the Sangha, well, I can't be there for those Sunday things most of the time, because I'm a Protestant that only has services on Sundays. There's no Saturday ones like some of the Catholics in the congregation. So that's kind of felt okay, but it's scary sometimes. And I thought one of the roots of the scariness is that during my discernment process, which is done within your home congregation, I had a bit of a bumpy road at first, because there was someone on my discernment team who really was uncomfortable and perhaps even objectionable to when I explained what my spirituality is, and that some of it is based in a contemplative practice, and that I belong to a Zen community. So, what are the kind of the balances of how much you say and what you say and how you do it for revelation?
Good question. Anyone want to speak to that one?
Yeah, I'll chime in. Something I learned from my CPE supervisor. She says time, place, condition, and degree, and I've always held that as a plan. Is this the right time? To what degree? Are the conditions appropriate? Instead of maybe you have to assess are these the right conditions, and to what degree do I reveal what I need to reveal, and because not everyone is going to may not be in a place where they can hear your truth. But sometimes it may not be the right conditions or degree, and you may have to find other places where that can be. But that's a rule of thumb. That was a gift to me. So
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Willie. Let's see. Let's go to John. Thanks for being patient, John. And we've got about 3 people with hands up. So if we can keep our question or comments brief, that'd be great.
Thank you, and thank you all on the panel. I have a question that's sort of about the more public-facing nature of the sort of blend of practices that you've been talking about. Because often we think of contemplation, I think, in the first instance as a kind of a personal or private thing. And I'm wondering, does having a blended practice change the way in which you are a citizen or a neighbor or, sort of a person in the world? How does that combination of practices express itself in your more kind of public-facing interactions?
Thanks, John. Anybody want to speak to that?
Sure, I don't mind. Hi, John. It's good to see you.
Hi, Amy.
I find that for me, I am so grateful for just knowing so many more people and how their spiritualities have expressed throughout their lives, and hearing everyone's story from Buddhists in my Sangha to folks who are in my congregations. That is really one of the best ways that I have then been able to show up in the world in a more compassionate and thoughtful way. I really like the 3 tenets of Zen Peacemakers: is not knowing, bearing witness, and loving action. And for me, being able to have those tenets in my mind as I'm interacting with folks, but then certainly as I'm showing up, whether it's, with civic duty that I have or volunteer opportunities that I have. And for me, that's been an interesting journey as well, because initially when I started practicing Zen, I was not aware of a lot of social justice work that happens in Zen, but Zen Peacemakers, Bernie Glassman, and really a few key figures have helped me see how the work that we do on the cushion absolutely prepares us to show up with compassion, with loving action, and with a willingness to not hold on to thinking I know how the world needs to be, and instead be present to how others are in the world. And so for me, it's not quite a public facing aspect of sitting in, but I also have participated in meditation as an act of social justice. Our Eon Zen Sangha has done climate action, in which we show up and we meditate while a protest is happening and provide space for the anger, the frustration at what's happening with our world. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, terrific. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks for the question, John. Paul or Willie, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. You don't have to, but if you've got it, please.
Well, I would make a comment is that, and this isn't so much on the social aspect part, but it's kind of the public face of being a dual belonging or inter-spiritual practitioner. I think I'm publicly that way most of the time, and it creates a conversation. People are curious, and in a lot of ways, Christianity is in trouble today. I mean, a really big book that came out this year is called "Do I Stay Christian?" by Brian McLaren, one of Richard Rohr's colleagues. And you have a lot of people in the Christian churches who are really wondering, gosh, can I stay here? Is this really for me? And so exploring dual belonging and perhaps learning from Zen or Buddhism or Hinduism or Judaism can really help people. And so to me, it's almost evangelical to take this kind of stance because it opens people up.
Thanks, Paul. Willie, it looks like you unmuted. I don't know if you had a comment.
Well, I am thinking about the question. I would say, whether you're Christian or you're Buddhist, you show up. That's what the teachings tell us. I think if we split them, then we're not really showing up in a true sense. And I would echo with Paul. Christianity is in trouble, and people are really questioning whether or not they belong. Something is missing, but if it's gonna be different, then we do have to show up, and you do need a practice that's going to reinforce that and strengthen that. We can't separate it. I mean, the Eucharist ends, go in peace to love and serve the Lord. It doesn't say go in peace and now that you've got the cookie, go home, you're saved. That's bad theology.
Thanks, Willie. Ron Large, you're stuck there on that ice wall.
Yeah. Full disclosure, I'm Amy's dad.
I was going to hazard a guess that there was a connection there.
Well, just a quick question. So, and John's question sort of prefigured mine and Amy's answer and some of the comments as well, but it's really about contemplative meditative practice and thinking about social change and social justice. So how do those two really get integrated so that they don't get sort of, contemplative practices kind of for me alone? It's sort of isolating. We don't really think about it having a social impact. And just to be quick, I mean, Amy knows this. I teach a lot of courses on Martin Luther King and Gandhi. And one of the things that they both deal with is sort of that intersection, that connection between their own sort of prayer life, spiritual practice, and their involvement in movements for social change. So I just wanted to maybe have people comment a little bit more on how that connection works for them and how they sort of make that work. So appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks for the question, Ron. And Amy, I just have to say, this changes everything between you and me. I think I might be older than your dad.
I don't know. 1950.
We're close.
Okay.
Anybody have a comment on Ron's question?
Just gonna see, Willie, if you did. You've been involved with Zen Peacemakers for quite a bit.
Well, I'm going to go back to what I said. I think you show up when you can. As I said it in a disrespectful way, but the service ends with go in peace to serve, or the service is ended, the work begins. It's about how you see your practice. It's not if it's a belief, then you're not doing social action. You're holding on to a bunch of words and that have just cut you frozen. But if you're going to take what you profess as a baptized Christian seriously, then you take it out and you do something with it. You don't hold on to it. And the same thing with, the precepts then say the same thing, right? Even more so. The Sangha is not just the people that we sit with. The Sangha it's broader than that. Living in the city, I have to ride a Sangha on the subway. And some of those people, I have a hard time with.
Yeah. Thanks, Willie.
Yeah, I'll say something, Jeff. Yeah, I really appreciate Amy's dad. What was your name again?
Ron?
Ron,
Yeah.
yeah, really important. And I would just say in the contemplative groups that I'm with, there are people who are most involved in social action. I mean, it's just part of our lives. It's part of what you do. And so action flows out of contemplation, and kind of that classic balance between contemplation and action is I think contemplation leads to action if it's authentic. And Richard Rohr has a quote that says, if your contemplative practice doesn't lead you to service, you better find a new contemplative practice. And that's my experience, is most people who are serious about their meditation and contemplative prayer are very involved in some type of showing up, social action.
And I would just add that for me, there is something that's so inherent about liberation for all beings. And that when you do take that vow, similar to our baptismal vow, seriously, then it does mean that we pursue the dignity of all, we pursue the liberation of all, and we proclaim the belovedness of all. And that, right, like you say, and like Richard Rohr says, it can't help but flow into social justice and into action. I do think that there is often a misconception that contemplative work is self-improvement work, which self-improvement work is just fine. We all have a lot that we can work on all the time. The tricky part is when you get stuck thinking, I need to fix myself before I can start helping others. And that's obviously never the case. Our lives are always ongoing, but our prayer life can really ground us in, again, what work needs to be done and give us the strength to do that. And certainly, right, Dr. King and Gandhi are wonderful examples of what it means to ground in something and take that out and find the strength to keep going, because we have to keep going.
Thanks, Amy. Thank you. Lumi from Netherlands.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Jonin and Paul and Mukei. I feel that this roundtable meal is very, very enriching. I live my life in an intercultural, interfaith journey of unfolding. I dance at Awake interculturally and interfaith. And I don't know if this is so much of a question as so much of a contemplation. Do you think as a whole, as two-legged beings on this planet, experiencing and bearing witness to so much that's going on, all the different interfaith groups that are arising out of the great unraveling, as Joanna Macy puts it, do you find that this is just exactly this, what we're interbeing with right now, is a new frontier for two-leggeds, being able to take what the mystics did in the Age of Enlightenment, where Mevlana, who was in Persia, was dancing his faith together and inviting everyone into his circles, at the same time that Dogen was in Japan doing the same thing. Let all the 10,000 things come to us. Right now, in our time, right here, do you feel like we're entering a new frontier, where there's going to be a time where we are going to be finding all of the commonalities and healing and holding all of the separateness that has happened through all these intercultural and interfaith relations. Are you experiencing this in your lives in any way?
Thanks, thanks, Lumi. If somebody wants to,
How can you not? Look at the elections. Look at climate control. Look at gun violence. You know, I mean, how can you not? We're in it. And you know, I don't think it's coming. It's arrived. And it's been with us for a while. And as we, even more of a time to ground ourselves in practice, because if we don't, we'll be loose cannons.
thanks, Willie. I don't know, Amy or Paul, if you have anything to add,
Yeah, I'll just really quickly say I do think that it is extremely important for folks to find a space for practice and what that practice can be for them. I'm also very aware that different practices resonate with different people, and it is important to maintain some of those some of that appreciation for how we do think differently and how we practice faith differently. And so I always have a sensitivity to appreciating that we do come together, but that we come together from our diverse places, and that we really respect and honor the diversity that it takes to bring us. So that way we continue to listen to one another instead of assuming everyone is thinking like us.
thank you, Amy. Paul, did you want to add or no?
Well, I just thank Lumi for her passion, for her articulation of that vision. I would like to hear more from her about it, because she definitely is feeling it and living it in a powerful way. And yeah, I think it's here. And we have a ministry up in Seattle. It's called Interfaith Power and Light, and it's an interfaith ministry. And now it's in 48 states. That it's not one religion, and it even includes people with no spiritual path or religion. So I think that's what's going on in the world today, is people coming together, and just like Willie said, it's where we're at. Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. And Bronson, I was committed to making sure that we got through everybody, and it looks like we'll be successful. Would you go ahead and unmute yourself? Nice to see you.
Thank you so much for the invitation, just the knowledge. I actually completed a 9-month-long One Sangha program out of Detroit, and actually had my 95-year-old grandmother go to the ceremony, devout Roman Catholic. That was definitely interesting. We've had some discussions, when did you abandon the Roman Catholic Church and things like that. And I think bringing her into that space kind of alleviated some of that. You look at some of Christ's lost years, where he went, and even his his actions and behaviors, and it's really kind of revered within Zen and Buddhism. I just want to say I really appreciate Willie touching on that last question, and for my own personal background, being Native American as well, looking at these prophecies and looking at these ancient texts and these pointings, and like he said, we're already in it. The fire's burning, we're in it. But the thing that's reassuring is there's individuals showing up, stepping up, and they're ready. And there's more out there than we know. People just kind of waiting, for that moment. So just wanted to share that. This was very refreshing, reassuring. And thank you for all the, comments and participants so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Bronson. Wonderful comment. I appreciate that. And we are approaching the end of our time, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. I want to invite everyone, if you're inclined, to join Zen Peacemakers. It's free. You go to the website, zenpeacemakers.org. And if you do so, or if you're already a member but you're not getting the newsletter, be sure to click on the newsletter. We put it together once a week, and it'll give you notice of of what we're doing, upcoming programs and so forth. We try to keep all of these kind of programs free. We love your donations. We live on them, but we're committed to having things like this be free and open to everybody. So feel free to join us. And I think we fit the bill. We are an interfaith organization, as we're seeing here today. So we're coming right up to the bottom of the hour. Some of you here within Zen Peacemakers International, we have a smaller community, the Zen Peacemaker Order, and it's a little more formal. And I know we have a few people here who are students. We have two cohorts going at once right now, a total of about 65 students that are going through a 2-year training program in Zen Peacemaker practices and so forth. And I only mention that, and I see that you're here, and Roland, you're here, and a few other folks, because I'm in the habit, when I'm leading those sessions, that we always begin with silence, but we always end with joyful noise. So in order to end this properly, if everybody would like to unmute and say goodbye, sing, make a silly face, bang on a drum, whatever you'd like to do. Thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye,
Thank
guys.
you, Jeff.
Bye.
Bye.
Everybody, wonderful discussion.